It's official. Britain's poor are at risk of starving. Research indicates that the least wealthy 10% may now have insufficient funds to buy the food they need thanks to rising prices. Indeed, the government's own family food report indicates that 6 million people are now spending 20% more on food than they did in 2007, but receiving 7% less for their cash. This has prompted British Education Minister David Laws to describe Conservative plans for further cuts in welfare expenditure as mind-boggling. He went as far as describing these plans as a political suicide note. According to Laws, Conservative welfare cuts would amount to £12 billion in the first 2 years of the next Parliament alone. At the same time, recent findings by the Centre for Economics and Business Research suggest that Britain has surpassed France and become the world's 5th largest economy, thanks to the effects of its multi-billion-pound sex and illegal drugs industries. The Office for National Statistics estimates the sex trade added over £5 billion to the UK's economy in 2013, and illegal drugs added almost £7 billion. So how do the public feel about Conservative plans to make billions of pounds of expenditure cuts in the years ahead? Why are so many children in the United Kingdom facing the prospect of malnutrition? And where has all the money gone? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. And we began by inviting the public here in London to comment on which countries they associate with malnutrition. Here's what they said.
Parts of Africa and India, specific countries within those continents. Well, I mean, my family originally from Sierra Leone, so especially at this time, and even before then, sort of health and malnutrition, all of that is a big issue there. Part of East Africa.
I mean, typically I would think of African countries immediately comes to the forefront, and then third world countries in Asia as well would be my main sort of thought initially.
Obviously with Nigeria in the news at the moment, and so it would be them countries that I would be thinking about.
From history, Ethiopia, Rwanda.
Africa, Ethiopia, and that's about it really.
Those are the views of the public. What do our experts say about which countries are or should be associated with the malnutrition of their children?
Well, normally, malnutrition is associated with low-income countries, although some middle-income countries also suffer from quite high rates. But you wouldn't traditionally associate it with, say, industrialised nations where, like the United States, malnutrition levels is less than 1%. But in developing countries, for example, low-income ones, it can be a sort of 35–40% of the population at risk of malnutrition or actually suffering malnutrition. Countries like Egypt, India, Pakistan, Peru, Sub-Saharan Africa countries have traditionally got quite high rates of malnutrition.
I think the image that comes to mind when we think of children suffering malnutrition is often children in Sub-Saharan Africa. The way that aid agencies, these merchants of misery, have often used these images of quite pathetic children with no agency to raise funds has embedded that image on lots of our minds. The reality, however, is very different. With the rise of austerity politics all around the world and growing inequality, child malnutrition actually takes place in both countries of the global north and the global south.
We wondered if the public in London were aware that the poorest 10% in Britain are now at risk of malnutrition. Here's how they reacted.
I think it's very poor, really, that we're allowing our people to get in that state. We should be doing more for ourselves rather than, yes, we do, there's a lot of charities and we do give a lot of money away. Maybe we should be looking more at home.
Well, first of all, it's shocking, but the more I hear in recent months and years, I'm not as surprised as I maybe would have been 2 or 3 years ago. It beggars belief, really. I mean, I can't really get my head around it, but shocking, but not totally surprised.
Is that a case of not having enough food, or is that more a case of not having the right foods? So it's actually a subject I'm very interested in. So yeah, I'm not overly surprised. You said 1 in 10, right? Yeah, I'm not overly surprised at that, just because a lot of families that don't feel they have the budget are sort of misguided into the fact that they can't afford healthier, more nutrient-dense foods, when I think they actually probably can. They just tend to choose the wrong options. And then obviously is a case, I know about poverty in the UK, so yeah, it's a shame, but it's not a surprise, like for sort of poorer regions of the country.
I would say it doesn't surprise me, but recently food prices have been going down with the supermarket wars, and incomes have been going up, so maybe it's turning the corner.
I'd like to see a bit more work done to help people in the United Kingdom and less aid sent overseas. It seems to get squandered a little bit before it reaches its target of where it should go to. So I really would like to see the people of Great Britain who need the help actually be helped more.
I'd be quite shocked, really. Yeah, I'd be very shocked, actually. It's hard to believe that 2014 people are going hungry in our country.
Well, if it's true what you say, it's because of the increase in cost in food, then my reaction would be that I think they ought to lower food. Basically, I'm really against like the European farmers, sort of you know, the EU farmer stuff. And I think that keeps food prices too high. So my reaction would be to, like, you know, get rid of farm subsidies, and that will reduce the cost of food. We can like buy it from around the world where it's a lot cheaper.
So quite a lot of surprise amongst the British public. How do our experts respond to this worrying information about British malnutrition?
Well, like most people, I'm shocked because, you know, Britain is actually a rich country and we shouldn't have 10% of children at risk of malnutrition. But unfortunately, the statistics sort of suggest that we're headed that way. And one of the reasons, of course, is the recession. Food prices in the last, say, 4 or 5 years are up 12%, and yet wages have actually fallen 8%, plus you've got a rise in unemployment. So that means that, you know, more and more children in particular, and also old people, are at risk of, you know, malnutrition.
It's absolutely shocking that 1 in 10 children in the UK are at risk of malnutrition. It means that their education will suffer, their health will suffer, and their future health will also suffer. But it's not enough for us to just think and be shocked by this kind of statistic. We have to turn that shock into anger and turn that anger into action to challenge the structures, the economic structures which make that situation a reality.
Officially now, Britain is now the world's 5th largest economy. So where is all the money? And why can't Britain afford to feed its children properly? We put that question to the public.
I find more and more as time goes on that these countries that we think of as first world countries and progress actually seems to set us back rather, and you know, we're looking ahead, thinking of how to improve things and forgetting about the basics.
I mean, we are ultimately, in terms of land area, a pretty small country, got like 63 million people, so I would certainly say, you know, there's a population issue which may play a part in that. I mean, if you look at the country as a whole, obviously the distribution of wealth is very sort of in London and not really anywhere else, so that would certainly play a part in being undernourished. And then, yeah, I guess areas of government spending probably goes on the wrong areas, and they don't focus so much on, you know, keeping everyone healthy. So that would be a potential other reason as well.
Well, obviously it's not income distribution or wealth distribution is heavily sort of tilted towards the people who have assets, basically. So it's a just the way the wealth is distributed between rich and poor people.
Sometimes we give too much away rather than actually looking at ourselves at home, and we should be supporting our own people as well a bit more, in fact.
Clearly there must be a distribution of wealth issue. Clearly there must be.
It's down to education, I think. People, you know, a lot of people have got to take responsibility for their own actions and what they spend their money on. You know, we can't keep blaming the government for everything. You know, people have got to start taking responsibility for their actions.
I think it is a lack of distribution of wealth. I live up in the north of England, I have to say we're not feeling it much up there. I would like to see it, a little bit of the north-south divide stopped to make it a little bit more equal. I understand this is a capital, but it would be nice to see more infrastructure placed up in the north and other regions of the UK.
We posed the same question to our experts to see if they could clarify why such an apparently rich country can't afford to feed its children properly.
Actually, that's a very good question, because we are a very rich country, and surely it's not beyond the policymakers' ability to actually do something about this growth in malnutrition rates. So really it's about prioritising things, and at the moment we've been prioritising cuts and not putting enough money and energy into solving this problem. And yet there's been tax cuts for the extremely wealthy, and that sort of gives you some idea that the government could do a lot more than it's been doing.
That's a really good question. With rising inequality, we're seeing the UK rising up the economic tables, but the poor staying poor, wages staying flat, and so on. The distribution of resources is really skewed in the UK, which is one of the reasons why it's really important we have a living wage. More and more, hundreds of thousands more people are working but still in poverty because the wages that they get aren't sufficient to pay for a decent standard of living. It's important that we have a mandatory living wage, which means that anyone who has a job is paid enough to live a dignified life.
In fact, the Centre for Business and Economic Research has established that Britain's economic growth has in large part been due to the inclusion of the turnover of the sex and illegal drugs sectors, valued at many billions of pounds per annum. Is this a source of inspiration or a source of shame? We put that question to the public.
I just think they mess around with all the statistics to create the impression they want. So now they're messing around with the GDP statistics because they want to make it appear that the economies are stronger or bigger or better than they actually are. So they've messed around with the, supposedly these GDP statistics. But my reaction is a negative one, because it means we have to pay more into the EU because we've got a larger GDP. So it's basically, if it's a UK only thing or whatever, we've shot ourselves in the foot. And so my reaction is negative to, I mean, if they'd always done it on that basis, but I mean, they play around with the unemployment statistics and just basically an inflation, the official statistics are just manipulated to create the impression they want to support the policy of the day. And they've messed around with this one to say, oh look, we're doing better than we are. And I don't know, create some sort of feel-good factor or whatever. And the net result is that we're going to end up having to pay more into the EU. So I don't like the fact they've messed around with the statistics, and it's had a real negative consequence for the UK. On a moral level, whether they include that or not, I mean, depends what they're going to use, who uses these statistics. I mean, is it a propaganda statistic? If it's purely for propaganda, then what, I don't really understand but it has a negative consequence for the UK, so I'm not happy.
I mean, it's just not right. I mean, I just can't, I can't, it just doesn't feel right.
I guess it should be shame, but if it's boosting the economy, I guess that's a good thing, but it's probably not ultimately. There should be tighter sanctions on it, but I guess that's another issue to discuss, but whether, they should make prostitution legal or whatever, because if it was, would it be done in a safer way, prevent sex slaves and people being mistreated? I think it certainly would. And then obviously the drugs is the issue of what drugs is it? In my opinion, is cannabis that bad? No. Is ecstasy? Yes. So depends what they're selling. So probably shame.
No idea. No idea. Quite surprising.
hopefully that'll put an end to the malnutrition.
Interesting you should say that, because I don't know how they get them figures from. If it's from gaming, then yeah, I understand, but I won't understand how they can get them figures from any other industry. I can't really say anything else on that one.
Well, aren't they illegal, so they shouldn't be, to me? But, yeah, that's odd. Very odd! I can't, yeah, that's very odd, and it's not right. Shouldn't be included in it.
I don't like it. Totally against it. It shouldn't be included in their findings. You know, it should be kept totally separate away from it.
What are we to make of the fact that Britain's economic standing has been to some extent boosted by the inclusion of its sex and illegal drug sectors? Our expert said this.
Well, obviously this kind of activity is not normally recorded in the GDP statistics, but they've decided to record them recently. Obviously, it's not just Britain that suffers this problem, it's sort of other countries as well. The United States has got similar proportion on these statistics, but it's part of the problems of society in general, that we've got these illegal activities really, often, you know, involving human misery in the sex trade and things like this. And so, you know, it's not something that any country should be proud of. And of course, the drug problem in the UK is headed towards the similar levels of what it is in the United States.
So the Office for National Statistics has calculated that about 0.7% of GDP comes from the sex industry and the drugs industry. Obviously, it's really good that the Office for National Statistics provides accurate statistics. The fact that so much of the economy rests on these industries should concern us, because there's often exploitation in there where workers aren't receiving fair working conditions.
So we know that 10% of young people in Britain risk exposure to malnutrition. In this context, how do people feel about the Conservative plans to cut another £12,000 million from the welfare budget? That's the question we asked next.
Not very good, actually, because there's lots of things going on. I think that our health service is struggling so badly as well, which then has a knock-on effect onto the malnutrition has a knock-on effect to the health service. So, not happy with it at all, really. Had experience in the last 6 months of being closely linked to a hospital through an ageing parent, and not happy.
In the current circumstances, most of the benefits that are being paid are needed. Stories you hear about people who get benefits, maybe unnecessarily, are, as far as I can fathom, the minority, a few that seem to sort of maybe fall through the cracks. Majority of people who get benefits need them and will continue to need them, and need them more if we're to improve people's standard of living.
It depends what areas of the welfare system they're cutting it from. I certainly think that some of the benefits paid out are a little bit ludicrous. The fact that now being fat is a disability, I kind of disagree with, purely because most of the time it's their own fault. So it's a completely different type of disability. You're not born with it or caused by an accident. It's just generally a case that you've sat around too long and overate. But so it depends where they cut it from. But yeah, I mean, I don't think the benefits system, the welfare system can increase, because that'll just create greater economic problems. So they probably just need to redistribute it in a better way, would be my opinion.
Again, it's a huge dilemma. You know, I don't think that you know, people should be encouraged, and I think the welfare, it's a system, it's a parachute system for those that unfortunately are kind of victims of, you know, circumstances, but it shouldn't be something that encourages people not to join a civilization that's based on everybody has a work ethic, and the more you put in, the more you get out.
Completely and utterly disagree with that. It should not be taken off the welfare budget at all. No, I do not agree with that at all.
That's difficult. I've always worked, you know, and provided for myself. I think people are expecting the government to do too much for them. You know, everybody's saying we need more benefits, but people have got to get out and do something for themselves. Personally, you know, I'm a worker and I always have been, and I just think, You know, we're giving people so much money. When people are getting more on benefits than I'm earning, I get a little bit annoyed, you know. When I'm in the rain in London, you know, going to work, I think, oh, that's not right. But hey, we learn to live with it, don't we? And tolerate it. That's what we are. Very tolerant, I think.
If you were to name that party to me, I would probably definitely not vote for that party.
It's a Conservative Party.
I will definitely not vote for the Conservative Party. Yeah.
Why is that?
Again, because of the policies, we should be actually giving more rather than cutting more. You know, we should be supporting the people rather than taking things away from them.
So, putting it all together, we gave our experts the final word on their views about the state of the British economy, the threat of malnutrition, and the Conservative plans for further welfare cuts.
Well, welfare cuts are easy to make, but they have major impacts, and so it's all about priorities. There's no doubt that Britain, we spend a lot of money on defence, we've got very low corporate tax rates, and if you want to tackle malnutrition and poverty and issues like that, then unfortunately you do have to pay your taxes, and corporations need to pay their taxes, and the rest of the population has to share some of the burden, and those that do well need to contribute. But at the moment, you know, the trend is the other way, is that people are very reluctant to pay their taxes, but they want to tackle these issues, and it's sort of a societal problem. It's not just a government problem. I mean, it's that society is not accepting you know, the necessary tax rises, and that people say they would do it, but when it comes to voting, they don't.
So welfare cuts will make the most vulnerable even more vulnerable, and that should concern us all. When people aren't able to get a basic standard of living, they're often vulnerable to severe forms of exploitation. That's bad for all of us because it doesn't just push down wages or the conditions in those shadow economy, but it also brings down wages in the formal economy as well. And so in order to ensure that everybody gets a better and fairer slice of the pie, we need to make sure that people aren't vulnerable to that kind of exploitation.
So the conclusion of our inquiry is a range of views about these worrying and serious issues. Britain's children really are at threat of malnutrition. Britain's economy really does depend in part for its growth on the sex and illegal drugs turnover. And the Conservatives really do plan billions of pounds of welfare cuts for the years ahead. The conclusion is simple. Whatever Britain's future, at best, it is bleak indeed.